I'm Katie Garrett, and I've been here in Alpharetta since 2021. Joined Alpharetta Methodist in early 2022. This is actually my second time here. I joined Alpharetta in 1980 when my husband and I were married in the old, which was the chapel's Vine Branch now. And we stayed here, made it our home church, and raised three kids here, and then left in 1991. Went to Noonan, Georgia, where we stayed for 30 years, and then decided to come back. And we knew we wanted to come back to Alpharetta Methodist because it was our church home at one time, and we had such strong ties to the church. So when we got back here, we were pleasantly surprised that even though it was larger, it was still as warm and friendly. So we do have three children. I have a son who is 43. His name is Matthew. And I have a son, Seth, who's 40, and a daughter, Rachel, who's 37. And between all of them, I have 8 grandchildren. I have 5 local and 3 that are in another state. So we spend a lot of time as grandparents doing different things with them. I wanted a church that when I walked in, I could feel the presence of Jesus, and I could feel that it was a church that was full of people that were seeking Jesus, and it was a biblically centered church, and that it really had a warmth that I needed. And I needed because I was looking for a church home, and in spite of the size, I felt that warmth. So I was looking mainly for biblical principles. I was looking for Jesus centered. I was looking for certain things, and it checked all the boxes. It did, definitely did. I grew up in church. If it was Sunday, we were in church. But thinking back in my life, I can think of 2 things that happened as a child where God nudged my heart. And one of those was when some missionaries came. I was about 7, came to speak to our church, and all of a sudden I was very worried about where they were going to eat lunch. And after church, I found my way to the missionaries and asked them if they had somewhere to go to eat lunch. And they both informed me that they did have other plans, but thank you, because I was very concerned that they wouldn't know where to eat lunch. And then I went home, and I constructed a worship center in my bedroom. And I had a pair of plastic praying hands that I had made at Campfire Girl Camp and a picture of Jesus. And it was a little tiny area in my room that was my little corner. And then fast forward, went to college, did not go to church, kind of drifted away. And I had a call one night from the Campus Crusade for Christ. And I think it was a God nudge. I listened to all the questions. They said, "Can we ask you some questions?" So they asked me some questions, and I answered the questions, and I ended up accepting Jesus that night in college. And so we arranged to meet the next day, face to face. And I would love to say that I did that, but I did not do that. I stood them up. I didn't. I was scared. I didn't know what it was going to mean for me, and at that time, I did not tap into the feeling that I had had the night before. I tapped into my fear. So God stood by patiently. Fast forward 10 years. I was at a K. Arthur women's conference when I was 30 and had an altar call, and once again answered the questions and accepted Christ again. And this time I was ready. The first time I felt very warm and very close to God. The second time I felt that he sort of picked up my head and said, "Okay, it's time." And at that point I had 2 kids, and I knew I needed to be grounded for my children, and I know I needed to tap into the faith that I had had as a child. So I began taking Bible studies and tried to be a good mom. And then there came a time when God pulled me out of a very dark place when my little daughter was 2 weeks old, contracted a disease. We didn't know what it was. She went down to Scottish Rite. She was near death. They were trying to rule out meningitis, and they stuck her back 5 times, and they couldn't get a tap, so they couldn't rule it out. Well, at that point, I was so tired and desperate. I remember lying in the bathtub, crying that night, and I finally said, "God, okay, if you need her, you have her back. You take her back. I'll be okay. It's your will, not my will." And after that, I felt the biggest sense of calm. And the very next day, actually, the doctors isolated the virus, got the right medicine in her, and she's now 37. Never forgotten that God took care of me in that very, very dark place. Another time for me when I felt God's presence was, I have not talked to my oldest son in 9 years or seen him in 9 years. I don't know any of his contact information. He left our family for a different kind of life. There was no falling out. It just was for different reasons. And at first I prayed very hard that God would bring him back, and we tried a long time to reestablish that connection and that relationship. And I wore this, and I saw life through a lens of sadness, great sadness, but didn't lose my faith until several years into this. I just, in the darkest of darks, just said, God, I give him back to you. You take him. I can't do this anymore. I can't live my life this way. And after that, I felt the calm, and I was able at that point to see life through a lens of joy and of eternal promise. I still long for the day that I might see my son, but I know I might not. But I know that God has him. So God has been there for me. God has had to wait on me many times. But I can truthfully say that the two darkest times, when I finally said, thy will, not my will, he has been there for me. I had a problem growing up with feeling good about myself, self-identity. I did not have a good sense of who I was. And therefore, I wandered around. I basically was in a desert, my own desert, easily until I turned 30, with wondering who I was, not wanting to stand out. And so the fear back in college was, oh, well, they're Jesus freaks, and I'm sure not going to hang out with them. Even though that feeling I had over the telephone was fantastic, because I was very lonely in college. But overnight, I let the fear take over, and I didn't know what they would ask me to do. And I was scared of that because I didn't want to stand out, and I didn't want to own my faith at that point. In the years following, I just wandered around. I couldn't seem to find the right kind of people that were the people that I needed to be around. I wasn't doing anything that was against the law, and I wasn't a crazy wild person, but I just had no sense of purpose. And then along came Tom, my husband. I met him, and I began to think, okay, well, maybe I have some worth. And so we got married and started putting together this little family. And I began to realize maybe God has a plan for me. And we joined the church immediately. And I knew inside of me that I needed to be in church. I knew that. But I had such a problem with trying to please so many different people that it didn't feel like that was an identity that I wanted. But when I turned 30 and I accepted Christ the second time at the Kay Arthur conference, I said, enough, I'm done. And at that point, life wasn't perfect, because it never is. But I knew at that point that was the direction I needed to go in. That for my children, for me, that I needed to start on the right path. So I had probably a 10-year period of just kind of wandering around, just like a cork on the water, bobbing around, just reacting to things. I had just had some medical issues, and I had lost a baby and almost died. And I knew that things needed to change with me. And I didn't know I would accept Christ that night for the second time. But I knew I needed to go to the conference with the two of my friends. And when we were sitting there in the auditorium, and Kay started speaking these such words that were so soothing to me, like a balm, words that I needed to hear, words that were coming into my heart. And we bowed our heads, and she said the words that, if any of you feel like you want to accept Jesus, just raise your hands. And like I said, it was like something had pulled me up, and that night, and I accepted him fully, knowing that my life was going to change. So nothing specific, but I was like I was parched, and I was so thirsty, and everything she was saying was quenching my thirst. It was amazing. I've never forgotten it. Never forgotten it. Yes, the two people with me were members of our church, and they supported me. I shared with them that I accept Christ, and we kept on with Bible studies. I kept on with every Bible study I could find. Tom bought me the Bible that Kay Arthur was using for my birthday, and right after the next year we had our daughter. I mean, it was just like God was waiting for me to say, okay, I need you. So I had a lot of support from my two friends that we took the Bible studies together, and we would discuss things. And funnily enough, I'm back in touch with them. We lost touch while we were in Noonan, but we are back together. They're not in the church anymore, but they're scattered, but they're close enough to where we can have lunch. So they were definitely my support group. I had a very strong support group at that time. I definitely, and Tom was very, very supportive. I still called myself a new Christian, even though I was raised in the church. I didn't fully understand about accepting Christ. And they helped with questions. They helped, just undergirded me, really, in those first few years when I did that. Yeah. It changed for me because I think that you're living with the statutes, the commandments that Jesus has put forth on how to be a Christian. Those are my guidelines. And it also calls for putting him first, which really denying myself, put death to self. And I fully understand that, because you can't serve both yourself and Christ. So I think that for me, living differently means that I am not afraid to speak about my faith to others. I'm not afraid to be labeled whatever somebody wants to label me.
A Jesus freak.
A Jesus freak. And I had somebody recently say, well, you love Jesus. And I said, thank you. I take that as a compliment. Thank you for that. It calls for you to make different priorities. Not that you sit around and wait on God in your living room, but you are prioritizing, and you're trying to understand what Jesus told his disciples and what he told us how to live, and understanding that we are going to sin every day, but that he is there for us. And to me, the important thing is when you have sinned, is to go to him and repent, and try to not do that. Try to not keep doing the same thing. But I do think that by living differently, I use God as my guide, not the world. I'm in the world, not of the world. And I just try to now I don't try to surround myself with just Christians, because I have some friends where we live that go to different kinds of churches. But I feel very courageous enough with them to speak about Jesus. I wasn't always able to do that. And I think that Christians need to live set apart, not up on the moral high ground, but recognizing that there are flaws, that you are going to sin. But that's part of the reason that we have Jesus, is that he's there for us. I'm just not interested in a lot of what the world has to offer. I just feel that there's so much out there for us if we can just do what Jesus would say, and try to act like the people that he would want us to be, and for me to be my best self, which involves telling people about my faith, which is not very easy sometimes. But I think you have to. There's something in everyone's story that's going to speak to somebody else. And I didn't have a huge drug problem. I wasn't on heroin. I was not an alcoholic, but I've had kind of an ordinary life. But I haven't always walked with Jesus. He's been there with me, but I haven't always been with him. And I reckon, yeah, and when I use that, I think, okay, just be careful when you're in your audience who you're speaking with, because I teach Sunday school, and we've talked about that. But when I say that, what I mean is that I put Christ first. I don't put my wants and needs first. I go to him first. I pray for him not to fix my life, but to be in the boat with me. And he is in the boat with me as we're going through the storms, because there's another storm out there. It's not just that Jesus is the fixer and he'll come fix your situation and then everything's perfect. But if you don't make him your priority, and to me, death to self is, I am not worshiping other little g gods. I am not chasing after money, and I'm not chasing after things, and I'm not chasing after prestige. I am more interested in being the best person that I can be, and that is through my heart being turned over to Jesus. And so death to self to me is not that I turn into some kind of a doormat, but it's more that I get my strength from Jesus. But I don't see him as a Santa Claus God. I don't go to him with my wish list. I go to him with a heart and say, what would you have me do today, Lord? Or how can I at least make me aware if I am doing things that are not pleasing, like gossiping, things that we all do. Help me to become aware. Help me to be aware of that. And I think that for death to self is that you're not pursuing kind of a selfishness, not tapping into a need. I need more shoes. And there's nothing wrong with more shoes. And there's nothing wrong with having money or having a beautiful home. It's not that. It's that what's first in your life. And I believe this, and I've believed it a long, long time. And for some, it's hard to understand. God is first over my family. And that's hard, I know, for some to understand. But because I love God, I'm able to be the best I am for my family. Comes from God. So it's funny. When we moved here, we were just going to come to church and just sit there. So I found myself teaching Sunday school 6 months later. The Sunday school teacher moved, and I said, well, I'll step in. And being a teacher, it comes easily for me. So that is one kind of built-in platform where I have shared different stories with them. I've shared about the estrangement with our son. But I have not shared the entire story. So that is one place. Our neighbors who come from all walks of life. We've got Jewish people, Catholic, people that don't go to church. There's lots of kinds of people. And there's a little group that gets together for dinner every week, and it's a interesting group, Protestants, Catholics, and Jews. And so we all end up talking about our faith. And that's when one of them said, well, you really love Jesus. And I said, I do love Jesus. And he is the guiding force and the light in my life. And I found it very easy with this particular group to share my faith. So I think part of sharing your faith story is, if you will listen to the nudges that God's putting on your heart, it's very easy to ignore when God is nudging you. If he's hitting you with a 2x4, which he's done before, it's hard to ignore that. But if he's nudging you to sort of speak up, we have a neighbor that we helped recently with some medical things, and I've spoken to her, and you have to understand who your audience is. She doesn't know Jesus, but I've spoken to her about my faith life. And she said something the other day. She said, well, I know you're in church on Sundays. I said, that's correct. We're in church. And we helped her quite a bit, and she was not able to pay us back, but every time she turns around, she says, "Thank you for helping me. I know you're good Christian people." And we didn't do it to be good Christian people. We did it because she needed help. So I think that when God is speaking to you about perhaps saying something, say it. Don't be afraid. And it's the fear, I think, that paralyzes a lot of people about their faith. The one thing I think is the feeling that I'm not in my life alone, that I have Jesus right here with me, and that no matter what you're doing, he's right there, and that he's not here to take away the things that you're going through, but he's here to get you through them. And I think that's very comforting to me, particularly because I've gone through some things in my life, and he has been there for me. It is hard, I think, for people that don't have faith to visualize Jesus, maybe, but I think he's in your heart, he's in your head, and I think that's how I carry him with me. So it's the comfort and just the knowing that I'm trying my very best, Lord, because I am really trying to follow you. That makes me perhaps think that I'm on the right track. And there are just things in my life that have happened that I think, okay, I'm doing the right thing. Moving back here, for one thing, has really propelled me down my faith path. So God, this was a God thing for us to come back. My favorite Bible verse is Matthew, the last verse of Matthew. Is it 20? The last chapter, or is it 18? Whatever is, lo, I'll be with you always until the end of the age. I just carry that with me.
Okay.
And it is so comforting to me.